Good morning. I'm making this short video to give some economic and political context for the flourishing of the short story and to give some cultural and philosophical context for the story you're going to be reading this week, Nathaniel Hawthorne's Young Goodman Brown. So when you go to content for this class, first of all, I'll just note that I've broken the class up into different, let's say, units. One of them is Romanticism, but we are also going to be going chronologically from Romanticism to Realism, from Realism to Modernism, talking about the development of film and its impact on modernist literature, and from modernism to postmodernism, and then finally to the contemporary moment beyond postmodernism. But yeah, for this week, you are reading about Romanticism. So let's just start with the political and economic conditions. The basic thing that you need to know is that in the 1790 Copyright Act, England finally starts granting its authors a protection on their books so that when an author writes something, the author can sell and control that product for 14 years. That was the 1709, I think. And then it started expanding to from 14 to 28 years, and then finally to 42 years by 1842. So what's happening is that authors are finally getting paid to produce books, and they're finally able to hold on to the rights longer and get paid longer in their careers for the books. Now, in the United States, this doesn't actually happen until 1831. And so this coincides with the major explosion of American authors, right? So up to this point, an author could publish a work and they would not be able to really make any money off of it. Hawthorne in some of the reading says that he really wasn't even doing it for the money, and his family didn't really need to worry about that. But it is a big deal for everybody else who is trying to make money. But the issue with the United States too, and it's complicated, but it's interesting that publishers in the United States are selling overseas books, so from England, really cheaply, and the same thing is happening in England with American books, and so it's just a mess. Like everybody's trying to get away with the cheapest way of selling these books, etc. But yeah, the thing to take away from this information is that in 1831. Authors start in the United States to have they have the first 14 years that gets extended to 28. So you can own the copyright of your book for 28 years, and then you can apply for a 14-year extension after that. So basically, you can own the copyright of your book for the rest of your life. Okay, what is happening internationally is Romanticism, and I meant for that to open in a new window, but I'll fix that. But basically, I added this encyclopedia definition of Romanticism because it just didn't seem like everything was falling into place with the way that I had set up these definitions. So just to know, Romanticism is an attitude or intellectual orientation develops around the late 18th century, early 19th century as a direct response to Enlightenment. If Enlightenment is rationalism, the idea that science and math can explain everything and create order in the world, Romanticism says that is wrong, that the understanding in the world is always going to be contingent upon the individual, the subjective perspective, and individuals, as we all know, are irrational. We use our imaginations. We're spontaneous. Humanity is, that is, we're emotional. And so it cannot really be trusted. I think what I really take to in this class is this idea of a kind of critique or a response to order through the mysterious, the weird, the occult, the monstrous, the diseased, and yeah, even in Young Goodman Brown, the satanic. Um, it's a way of writing in America that is responding also to this idea that everything is perfect, right? But yeah, there's a huge wilderness that is being explored in the 19th century, and so there's a lot of a sense of the transcendence of nature, and really, there was this preoccupation with the idea of the human pushing herself to the ends, to learn as much as possible about humanity, and so we get this genius and this hero figure. But the idea is that most romantic literature is critical of the idea that things can be known, that things can be understood. So yeah, so issue in this is like the big, this is happening in the 1700s in England, and in the early 1800s, but it doesn't really take off in the United States until these copyright laws start kicking in, and yeah, so we get Hawthorne and this list of white male authors with Harriet Beecher Stowe in there also, and but yeah, this idea is a response to the heritage of optimism, man's perfectibility, right, humans' perfectibility, and as a and it's critical, it's political, right? That there's the Civil War is about to happen, and this idea of how humans are treating other humans is a big debate. Okay, so do read this background information. It's pretty good. I just kind of took from a couple of sources online that I think really covered it well. One thing I asked that you also read is the article that Poe wrote. This is a really good starting point into an understanding of how American literature started to define itself as different. Right, so we have like international romanticism, which is just romanticism, and the Brits are doing it, and it's happening in Germany, it's happening all over the place. This kind of Gothic revival, of response, a return to medievalism and stuff like that. But in the United States, what Poe starts doing is to say like, and this is happening consciously. Like authors are saying, we need to create an American literature that is very different from what's happening all over the world. And so Poe starts writing about what makes these American authors particularly American and particularly good. And he comes up with this really neat idea about how the short story is the perfect literary form. It's like a poem in that it's short. You can read it in 30 minutes. You don't get distracted. You don't have to get up and go to work the next day in the middle of it all and then come back. But and it's all connected, right? It's like poetry. It's all connected. It produces this single effect. And Poe goes on to say that Nathaniel Hawthorne is one of the best at it. And so people start looking at that and saying like, okay, so what's Hawthorne doing that's really good? And what it is this idea that everything in the story is so focused on producing this effect, this unity of effect or impression. He talks about it down here too, the totality. The single effect. He invents such incidents. He then combines such events as may best aid him in establishing this preconceived effect. So everything just coheres around this one central idea. So how can then we go to Young Goodman Brown and think about what he's doing? So the questions I really ask you, typically Young Goodman Brown gets read as this critique of Puritanism. And what hopefully you know by now, if you don't, is that Hawthorne, the family name was actually Hathorne without the W. And Hawthorne comes around and changes it to Hawthorne because I think his great grandfather was one of the judges presiding in the Salem witch trials, and he was bad. He was really he's just a really mean-spirited person who never really got that the witch trials, that A, there were not witches, and B, that the witch trials had everything to do with politics and property and controlling women and controlling people, and not with witches. And so Hawthorne's really embarrassed that this is his family relative, and he changes his name to Hawthorne. And when he first publishes Young Goodman Brown, he publishes it anonymously in a magazine because he doesn't want anybody to know that he's actually writing this about his family. But yeah, by the time in the 1840s, he's owned it. And so he publishes it in the Old Manse, Mosses from an Old Manse, under his own name. But yeah, so Young Goodman Brown takes place in Salem, and obviously there's this sort of aftermath of the Salem witch trials. But the typical reading is about a Puritan critique. I want to focus more on the way that the story can also be a critique of America's founding. The way that America had to do some pretty questionable things in order to establish itself as a country. And of course, all countries do this, so it's not just something germane to America. But I think the story can also be read as an interesting critique of the compromises that people need to make in order to live in a society that was founded on maybe not the best principles. I mean, it is founded on some really good principles, but maybe founded in ways that aren't necessarily the best policies, practices. So yeah, I want you to read through the story, thinking about it as an allegory. I define that term for you, and write a response. And I'm going to do a short video, just giving you more context about how to complete the assignment itself. Good luck.